Our guest on This is America and the World is Sarah Longwell. She's the founder of Defending Democracy Together, executive director of the Republican Accountability Project, and is the publisher of The Bulwark, a news network of political analysis. Sarah Longwell, good to be with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Defending Democracy Together, an organization. Tell me a little bit about that organization you founded.
Well, I've been a Republican my entire life, and when Donald Trump got elected, I, like some Republicans, was very alarmed. And I started the organization with Bill Kristol and some other folks on the right who wanted to push for some accountability in the Republican Party. One of the first things we did was launch a sub-project called Republicans for the Rule of Law to defend the Mueller investigation from political interference. And in 2020, we ran a large project called Republican Voters Against Trump. And that's really what we've been. We've been a group of Republicans who wants to defend democracy, who saw Donald Trump as a threat to democracy, not just to the Republican Party, but to the country and democracy writ large. And, when it comes to how you defend democracy, there's always an oppositional political party, but mostly the best good can be done by people within a political party trying to hold their leaders accountable or trying to push for change from within their own party. And that's how we saw our role.
How are you defining democracy? What do you think are the pillars of democracy?
Oh, that's such a good question, because a lot of times people think of democracy as voting, or they have some specific way that they interpret the mechanism of democracy. But democracy is all around us. It's what we breathe in America. It is our institutions, it's our norms, it's our values, it is elections, but it's all the institutions that undergird the American system of how we choose our leaders and how we govern ourselves. And when I say that Trump was a threat to democracy, it is things like the way that he waged a war against our institutions, our media institutions. It's the way that he waged a war against our norms, things like releasing your tax returns or not firing, the head of the FBI. I could name a million things that he did that was, tore down our norms and our systems. And so, part of the whole idea of defending democracy is that the American way of life, Donald Trump was putting our political system and our way of life, he was attacking it as part of his political strategy. And, I think the protection of liberal democracy is at the heart of what we want to do.
So what do you say is the state of our democracy right now, as you see it?
Yeah, the state of our democracy is in tough shape. One of the things that Donald Trump did as he was waging this war, he weakened a lot of our institutions. He politicized a lot of our institutions. But some of the worst things that he did was he eroded America's confidence in our institutions, like take elections and take the lies that Donald Trump tells around our elections. So he says as a main platform now, that the election of 2020 was stolen, and he'll only endorse candidates in 2022 who will say that our elections were stolen. And that is, imagine 70% of the Republican Party believes that the 2020 election was fraudulent. Just that undermining of the sense that our systems are just, that they are free and fair, that undermining is incredibly pernicious, incredibly dangerous, and it's shaking faith overall in the way that this country governs itself.
You've come hot out of the box in talking about Donald Trump, but you just said 70%, 75 I've read as well, people who are Republicans believe that the election was stolen. A lot of good people out there in that 75 or 70%. What do you do with that piece of information? I mean, because 70% of Republicans believe what Donald Trump is saying.
Well, what's interesting is that it's not Donald Trump alone. There's an entire ecosystem. And when I say that he's been damaging to democracy, what he's done is he's propped up an entire ecosystem in which the voters, the elected officials, the sort of right-wing media infotainment system all reinforce each other. to tear down faith in elections. And so you're right, there are lots of good people that believe it, but they believe it because, they think, well, it must be true. Not only does Donald Trump say it, but now every candidate who's running for elected office in a Republican primary, almost without exception, even people that would be considered normal, Kay Ivey, for example, they come out and they run on these platforms that say, well, I think that the election was pretty fishy and there are real election integrity problems. And as a result, average people don't know what to think. And I do these focus groups all the time where I actually talk to voters, and they don't trust the election system anymore. And I can't tell you, just the loss of trust. Like sometimes when you say well, what's the threat to democracy? It's when people don't believe things work, that the central fundamental mechanisms of our democracy, like elections, where people believe that they don't work, that they're fraudulent, that they're being rigged in some way. That's the central problem. And so when you say, what do you do with those people? I mean, how do you pull people out of a right-wing media ecosystem? And even if you did, they'd still have elected officials telling them something was true. So it's an incredibly complicated problem because it's like a whole constructed reality on the right.
But some of these Republicans who believe this are your friends. I'm not quite sure. What do you say to them after you say, okay, election was stolen, where's the evidence? And there really isn't any evidence. 60 lawsuits in Supreme Court and Bill Barr and everything. So there's nothing underneath that. But Trump, the way I see it, kind of ends up being the symptom as opposed to a problem that probably started back 20, 30 years ago, don't you think?
Yeah, but
Tea
that's what I mean
Party
when
to Newt Gingrich to Donald Trump. I mean, isn't it a run that's and what? Not only do they not believe in the election, but they don't have any faith in government, and that's a lot of people.
It is true. Okay, so there was a lot of questions in there. So let's see. What do I tell?
That's what I did.
Well, what do I tell my friends? What do I say to other Republicans? Look, I've been very vocal about this idea that you lie to people is wrong. This is and the idea that you could be cynical enough to believe that political power mattered more than telling people the truth. And I mean, look, you can talk about the election. You can also talk about January 6th. You can talk about COVID. There have been lies replete. It has become, it's so funny when I was not funny, it's tragic, but when I was young, when I was coming up in the conservative movement, one of the things that was animating about the conservative movement was the idea that we believed in truth. We believed in character and decency. All of that stuff has gone completely to the wayside. In fact, it's the inverse. Now people want, the strong man. They want people to be mean and to lie and to be aggressive, and they don't care if you have bad character. That is completely different. And it gets to the second part of your question, which is, isn't Donald Trump just the natural evolution of the conservative movement? And I don't think that he is. Look, I think that there was in 2016, there were a lot of good candidates that could have been elected. And because there were so many candidates, they split the kind of normal Republican vote, leaving Donald Trump alone in his burn it all down lane. I do think he was a bit of an accident of history, but then he came into office and he did change people. There's this Russian expression somebody taught me called the appetite increases while you're eating. And I think that's what happened. It was like a plurality of Republicans went for Trump. And then over time, they became kind of normalized, socialized to his way of doing things. And that's why you see so many candidates trying to imitate him. But the Republican Party that I knew, that I grew up with, was built on principles, was built on an ideology, was built on a set of ideas. I mean, in 2020, the Republican Party put out a platform that had no ideas, no platform. It just said, we support Donald Trump. Yeah. That's a huge departure from what the party used to be.
Let's take a little break. Talking with Sarah Longwell. And she has announced that she is a Republican. She did not say former Republican. She said she is a Republican. Founder of this group, Defending Democracy Together. Take a little break. Back on the other side. This is America and the World. This is America and the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, 21st Century Citizenship, the Frank Islam and Debbie Dreisman Foundation, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotondaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy. Sarah, January 6th, that really was a huge threat to democracy. After that, have there been subsequent warning signs that we can put our fingers on where you think that democracy is in danger after January 6th? Is there something going on now that we should keep an eye on?
Well, look, the biggest thing that happened after January 6th that really did shake me in terms of its threat to democracy was the fact that that wasn't the end of Donald Trump. I mean, the idea that after inciting an insurrection and the fact that people had attacked the Capitol in an attempt to overturn an election, that wasn't enough for the Republican Party, for the fever to break and for them to walk away from Donald Trump. The fact that he wasn't impeached a second time, that there were so few who actually voted for impeachment. The fact that Kevin McCarthy, after condemning Trump, went down to Mar-a-Lago to sort of kiss the ring and reconfirm that Donald Trump was the leader of the party. The fact that Mitch McConnell said that he was morally and practically responsible for the events of the day, and then said just a few days later that if Donald Trump was the nominee in 2024, he would endorse him. Those just blew my mind. And then the other piece, the piece that I've just been watching happen in slow motion, is all of the candidates who are running in 2022 on the Republican ticket. From governor's races, Carrie Lake in Arizona, to Secretary of State races. You have a whole suite of candidates running in 2022 that is the most anti-democratic field of candidates that I have ever witnessed, because they're all running on a platform that says the election was stolen. They are lying to people for the cynical purposes of churning up Donald Trump's base so that they win Republican primaries. I am shocked that previously thought of responsible Republicans would be running on platforms saying that the election was stolen. David Perdue in Georgia is running against an incumbent Republican governor, Brian Kemp, because Brian Kemp refused to overturn the election in 2020. And David Perdue, formerly just a normal Republican who lost a Senate race in Georgia, is now running again for governor just because he thinks that the election was stolen and Brian Kemp didn't do enough to overturn it in 2020.
Let me ask you, you stimulate 1,000 questions. Do people care about democracy?
That is a great question. When I described it earlier as sort of the air we breathe, the water that we swim in, a part of it is that people don't notice democracy. They don't view it in its bigness, right? And so they don't care about it. If you asked people to rank things that they care about, they'd say things like inflation. Maybe they care about what's going on in Ukraine. They certainly care about taxes and the costs of things, COVID, but do they care about democracy? Not really, because people have always had it. They've always enjoyed it. They don't understand how fragile it is, and it's hard to see the erosion of it unless you're looking for it, unless you look at what's happening across the globe with Viktor Orban or Putin or Marine Le Pen, all of these anti-democratic candidates. You look and you say, could that happen in the United States? And I'll tell you what, 4 years ago, even with Donald Trump, I would have said it couldn't happen here. But after January 6th and watching the direction that the Republican Party is going, I am not as sure anymore.
Do you think that maybe a lot of people in America want an authoritarian president?
Nobody would tell you that.
Somebody to take care of them? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, nobody would say, boy, I want an authoritarian to be president, right? Nobody would say that.
But that's what's at stake, isn't it?
But will they say, I want Donald Trump to run for president in 2024, and would I happily vote for him? Yes, they do. Yes, they absolutely do. I talk to Republican voters. You know, there's this myth out there that the
Okay, hold on a second. 2024, Donald Trump is elected president of the United States.
Mm-hmm. What
happens to the country?
I mean, you have to imagine a Donald Trump with
Donald Trump.
No, I know. No, but I'm saying a version of Donald Trump. So at least the first version of Donald Trump was constrained by one thing, which was the desire to get reelected. A 2024 Donald Trump would have no such constraints. And so he would be thinking about ways to, just think about his cabinet. People like Mike Flynn, General Flynn, who has been out there putting forward all kinds of QAnon crazy conspiracies. Just Rudy Giuliani. It would be a cabinet populated by people who care nothing about the truth. They only care about their own power. You could see Donald Trump having his children. They were already installed. You just saw the news story about Jared Kushner getting $2 billion from Saudi Arabia. Like, imagine the level of corruption and also, installing his children for the future. I just think it's incredibly dangerous to have, beyond dangerous to have somebody like Donald Trump entirely unconstrained, and nobody respectable would go work for him at this point. And so you've got nothing but really crazy people who would be in his cabinet and in his administration.
Talk a little bit about how you see Republicans, how you see Democrats.
Well, it's been an interesting journey, because when I say that I'm a Republican, what I mean is I was here first. That I've been a Republican. I didn't sign on to a Trumpist version of the Republican Party, and I haven't stopped believing any of the things that I believe. Limited government, free markets, American leadership in the world, those are all things that I still believe in. But this Republican Party does not reflect those things. It is all of the things that made the Republican Party, that undergirded it philosophically. Donald Trump has eradicated all of that. So that's how I think about the Republican Party. It is the inverse of its former self, and without being absolutely decimated electorally, it is not going to reform itself. Which brings me to the Democrats. I have now a belated cheerleader for the Democrats. I would very much like them to defeat all of these anti-democracy candidates who are running. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party can be tough to root for. It's not great at messaging. I think is one of its big issues. It lets Republicans set the pace for every conversation. CRT, don't say gay. The election was stolen. They constantly find themselves trying to explain, playing defense, saying, defund the police. Well, we don't mean defund the police. It just is. They've got to find a way to meet this moment. I genuinely believe that we're at an incredibly dangerous inflection point in our country. And one of the things I look at all the time is I say, okay, I ask my focus groups of Republicans. If I ask Republicans, who would you like to see run in 2024? They say Trump. I say, okay, Trump's not running. Who would you like to see? They say DeSantis, Kristi Noem, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, whole long list, Tim Scott. If you ask Democrats, do you want Joe Biden to run again in 2024? They say no. And then you say, okay, well, who would you like to see run instead? And they just stare at you. There is no bench. There is no cohesive message. The infighting, there was sort of a totally over-interpreted mandate. He had no room to budge, and they're going for these massive omnibus bills where Americans know nothing about what's in them. They only know the cost of them. And so what happens, it's a catastrophe where they're infighting. They spend an entire year sort of squandering their electoral majorities when they could have gone on offense on a couple of key legislative issues, prescription drug pricing, other things that Americans would have liked, focused on COVID, which was really top of mind for people up until the point where Omicron finally started to fade here. And so I just, I think the Democrats need to recognize the threat that we face. And it's sort of like, one of the things that's interesting to me about Democrats is the way that they just sort of never stopped focusing on their policy priorities, which I understand why a political party does that. They have policy priorities, they care about them. But really, the focus has to be, how do you win electoral majorities and keep this authoritarian version of the Republican Party out of power? That should be agenda item number one. And I just feel like that's not what's been happening.
There are three bills before Congress that have to do with voting. There's voting and there's the counting of votes. And one of the things that I picked up for this, if people have not seen this incredible kind of a focus group of a number of different people, New York Times magazine of a couple of weeks ago, talking about democracy, a number of folks, including yourself. Three bills before Congress, the freedom to vote, the John Lewis, and the electoral count. Talk a little bit about those three and what's possible for passage.
Right now, of those three bills, only the Electoral Count Act has any chance of passing. Wow. So the John Lewis voting rights bill, those bills have been through many iterations, and part of the problem with the voting rights bills, and look, I very much support efforts to ensure that everybody can vote. There were some good policies in there around, allowing people more access to the ballot, vote by mail. There are good things in them, but the problem was it was a laundry list of progressive ideas that they wanted around voting that they were never, ever going to get with their slim majorities. And it was just one of those, it's a strategic miscalculation to think that the only way they were going to get it was to get Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema to blow up the filibuster. They hung all their hopes on the idea that that was going to happen. And so now Democrats are mad at Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. But the thing is, there is not another Democrat that's going to get elected in West Virginia. Joe Manchin is the reason that Democrats just were able to pass a Supreme Court nominee. There's a lot of things that Joe Manchin is getting Democrats, but he was not going to vote for this laundry list of Democratic bills. Now, he put forward a more compromised bill that actually we liked quite a bit and we pushed for, that was kind of a narrowed and focused bill. Unfortunately, they were never going to get 10 Republican votes for it. And they also knew that. And so we are left with the Electoral Count Act, which is actually completely different. The Electoral Count Act seeks to close a loophole right now where there is very opaque language around how we decide how elections are certified. Mm-hmm. And so what happened, we don't ever want what happened in 2020, where it suddenly became unclear whether, state legislatures could send alternate slates of electors, which was the John Eastman plan. It created, because the trust and the norms are breaking down, now there's a push to clarify the language to make sure that we do certify the votes in a very specific way. And it is getting bipartisan traction. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, there are a bunch of Republicans who are working with Democrats on an electoral count piece of legislation, and it should have bipartisan support because at the very least, it can protect from election subversion, which is, I think, one of the things that Trump was really trying to do in 2020, subvert the election.
When you see these state laws being enacted or introduced that apparently limit voting rights, what's the translation? What do you make of those?
Well, there's so many.
What are they about?
Yeah, well, the problem is there's so many of them and they're all different. So I'll tell you this, my overall frame on them is some of them are actually benign and people should not be super exercised about them. They are things like they're walking back certain pandemic era changes that allowed people, to vote early for a month, let's say. And they're walking it back so that the early voting period is now 15 days or 20 days. And nobody should get exercised about that. And sometimes those kinds of bills get thrown in with the really bad stuff. And the really bad stuff are things like in Georgia, where Brad Raffensperger, who refused to find Donald Trump's 11,000 votes, the Secretary of State there, they kicked him out in their bill. They kicked him out of being part of that certification process. That's a really bad change. Eliminating drop boxes in places that make it really hard for people who live far away from polling stations to drop off their mail-in ballot. That's a bad change. And so the trouble with these state level bills is they're not all the same. Some of them are very pernicious. Some of them are much more benign. And you really have to sort through them to figure out which bill is which.
We are at the end of our time, believe it or not. I'm so sorry that we don't have another half hour to go. Are you hopeful in any regard?
Always. Always. I'm always hopeful. Here's the thing. Look, I'll just say I would never be short on America. I'm always long on America. We will figure this out, but it won't just happen automatically. We have to work for it.
Thank you, Sarah, for the education, for the conversation. We'll do it again. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
For information about This Is America in the World, visit our YouTube channel, This Is America TV, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This Is America and the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, 21st Century Citizenship, the Frank Islam and Debbie Dreisman Foundation, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotondaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy.